Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this Friday, the 14th of October. And today in Brisbane, it is a glorious day out here, 22 degrees and partly sunny. It's going to be a great weekend. So much happening in the weekend. Well, right now, let's get on with the news. Apologies for starting a little bit late. Some of the tech hiccups that happen from time to time. But first of all, let's go to the news from our own Queenslander and Federal Treasurer Jim Chalmers. Is confident that Australia is can avoid the recession.
Treasurer, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Sarah.
We're hearing some very blunt warnings that the major economies are heading into recession. Are you hearing any optimism that a global recession can be avoided?
I think there's a real sense of foreboding here, Sarah, at the meetings of the G20, the IMF and the World Bank. I think there's a pretty broad recognition that the global economy is on the edge once again. For the third time in a decade and a half, the world does face the prospect of a global recession. There's still got a little bit to play out yet. But I think already something like a third of the economy, according to the IMF, is heading for recession, and so that is sobering enough. And it's something that can't be ignored as we put together our own budget in less than 2 weeks' time.
Under a Labor government during the GFC, Australia was able to avoid recession. Do you think you can do it again?
I think so, and that's the Treasury's current estimation, is that we will avoid recession. We've got a lot going for us, whether it's low unemployment, the high prices we're getting for our exports. We've had relatively solid growth in recent months, and so we've got a lot going for us. We're in better nick than a lot of our peers, but we need to be in better nick still. And that's why the budget that I hand down in less than 2 weeks will really be about building resilience. It will be the building blocks of a more resilient economy, because our best defence against all of this global uncertainty is a solid and responsible budget, not a fancy or flashy budget, but one that gets the job done.
Now, back then, of course, we didn't have a significant debt weighing down the economy. What's the IMF's assessment about Australia's chances of riding out a recession this time?
Well, the IMF and the OECD and others have downgraded Australia's growth prospects, but nobody is currently forecasting a recession for Australia, and that's obviously good news. We are optimistic that we can get through this period into a better future for our people and for their economy, but we do have to navigate what is becoming an increasingly narrow and more perilous path in the global economy. I think that's broadly understood around the world and in Australia as well. You mentioned that historical parallel with the global financial crisis. If you think about these three downturns in a decade and a half, the first one was a big financial shock that brought about issues with demand. The second one was a big health shock, which became more or less a supply shock. This one's a little bit different. It's an inflation shock, which has invited a blunt and brutal response by the world's central banks, and that risks a hard landing. And so how we respond to this is different to how we responded to the first two of those global economic downturns. The premium now is on what's responsible and affordable and sustainable and targeted. We can't have money spraying around in an excessive way or in an untargeted way. We need to make sure that any assistance we provide to Australians or that other countries provide to their citizens is sufficiently targeted with an economic dividend, so we don't make this inflation problem even worse and make interest rates go up more than they would otherwise.
Ahead of your meeting with Jerome Powell, you've said that you're going to talk to him about the consequences of those blunt and brutal interest rate rises. What alternative do they have with their own inflation running above 8%?
Well, I'm sure that's how they see it, Sarah, to be frank. You know, the conversations we've already had here in Washington, D.C., the central bank governors from around the world have made it very clear that inflation is public enemy number one. It's the biggest risk to our economies. It's come courtesy of the war in Ukraine and issues in supply chains brought about by the pandemic and some domestic factors as well. So whether it's Jerome Powell or other central bank governors, they are obviously very willing to do whatever is necessary to try and deal with this inflation, which has got out of control around the world and in some of the big economies that we monitor most closely. So this is actually the steepest synchronised tightening of monetary policy that we've seen in the inflation targeting era. That obviously has consequences not just for inflation but for growth and unemployment as well. And that's why in the budget that I hand down we will downgrade our forecast for global growth, and that will have consequences for the forecast for growth in our own economy and for unemployment as well.
As a major energy exporter, of course, Australia's been a big beneficiary of the spike in prices since the invasion of Ukraine. Are you going to be banking that windfall rather than spending it in your budget?
Well, first of all, I mean, the increase in energy prices also has a downside for Australia in what it means for our industries and particularly for our manufacturers when it comes to gas. And obviously electricity prices are an ongoing concern. That's one of the reasons why we will have inflation higher for longer, unfortunately. It's something that we're very attentive to and attuned to. But you're right that we're getting high prices for what we sell the world. It's come off a little bit since the middle of the year, but still high by the standards of the budget, and it will make a contribution to the budget. But that contribution won't be anywhere near making up for the persistent structural pressures that we have on the budget in areas like health and aged care and disability care and defence, and also remembering that as interest rates go up, the cost of servicing that $1 trillion in debt that we inherited in the budget goes up as well.
Just on the energy prices, there looks like there's some disagreement amongst your colleagues about how to handle those gas prices. Do you have any sympathy with Ed Husick's argument that the deal the government has struck with gas exporters is a dud and won't lower prices?
All of the ministers that I deal with on this issue quite regularly, they understand that. We've got a big problem with gas prices in the domestic market, and so I'll work with Minister King, Minister Husick, Minister Bowen, the Prime Minister and others in our cabinet and beyond to make sure that if there's more that we can do in the gas market to make it work for Australians rather than against them, then we should be exploring that. I'm prepared to do some work on that front because I think some of the concerns raised by our industries and by unions like the Australian Workers' Union are valid. We need to try and find the most responsible way to take into consideration those views that they've raised, but also the views of the companies themselves, and see if we can come to some kind of landing in the interests of Australians and their economy.
Jim Chalmers, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Much appreciated, Sarah. Thank you.
I must say the Treasurer spoke very well there. Well, of course, when we look at the elections, there are always elections won and fought on promises. So, what is going to happen with all the Labor promises?
Are you sick of governments not keeping their promises?
Well, I guess it depends on the global and economic circumstances.
Then you'll love Labor promises. Here at Labor Promises, we're keeping our Stage 3 tax cut election promise, no matter what the circumstances. Rising inflation? Not a problem. $1 trillion government debt? Relax. Global instability? Give it a rest, will you? We've got to keep this promise. Do we believe in this promise? Not on your life. In fact, we're ideologically opposed to it. Are we going to go through with it though? You betcha. We live in uncertain times. Storm clouds are gathering in the global economy. The IMF is sounding the alarm. Carrie Bickmore is leaving the project. But one thing you can rely on is we're keeping our really very expensive promise. We're not in the business of scrapping promises. The only thing we'll scrap is all the other initiatives we could have paid for if we did scrap this promise. We couldn't even break this promise if we wanted to. During the election campaign, wealthy people made us take a blood oath. Nevertheless, the opposition wants you to think we won't keep this promise.
All they've heard over the last week is the government trying to walk away from its Stage 3 tax cuts.
So let me make another promise. Here at Labor Promises, there'll be no crab walking, no moon walking, hell, no walking at all. We're standing still on this Stage 3 hill that we plan to die on, thank you very much. Sure, it'll cost the country $243 billion to keep this promise, but have you considered the political cost of the Labor Party of breaking it? Of course not, why would you? But the political cost is real. Remember when John Howard said this?
No way that GST will ever be part of our policy. Never ever. Never ever, it's dead.
That's right, he broke that promise, taking a GST to the 1998 election, and the electorate never forgave him for that, only making him Australia's second longest serving Prime Minister. A lot of people mistakenly think this tax cut issue is about tax cuts, but as the opposition leader rightly pointed out, this tax cut issue is not about tax cuts.
But this is not an issue now about tax cuts, it's about whether you can trust Anthony Albanese.
Voters want someone they can trust, not someone who might pragmatically adjust policies according to changing economic circumstances.
Labor promises. They can't be broken. Promise could be broken in 2023.
Well, this is a satire put together. It's amazing how they grab all this information and the little clips of what was being said and in what context and how they put it all together. Well, right now, the other area that we have always been discussing is the global climate change. And of course, the emissions and methane gas is one of the problems there as well. We're looking at reducing the carbon and all of those things. So, as part of evolution, we have always evolved and there have been things that have been happening. We are living in a world where the consumption of energy is paramount. Everyone relies on that. The minute the light goes out, you can't believe a day without electricity. So things like that. So we have changed, but with the change comes some consequences, and we keep making those adjustments. Are those proper? Are they well-founded? Where are we headed? But Australia is set to reduce its methane emissions.
Australian farms and feedlots produce plenty of hot air, thanks to farts and burps from livestock. The sector's been working hard to become carbon neutral by the end of the decade.
This additive has the potential of reducing carbon emissions by up to 90%.
By using alternative feed approaches, more might be needed if the government goes ahead with a plan to cut methane emissions by 30% by 2030.
Our government is considering signing up to the Global Methane Pledge.
More than 100 countries got on board with the agreement at last year's Glasgow Climate Summit, but Australia refused because the junior coalition partner feared a pledge could morph into a methane tax.
Which you, the consumers, pay. Ultimately, you pay.
The opposition argues farmers are doing enough already.
I don't know, you can go around and try and stick a plug up their backside. I don't know, what are you going to do about that? You can tell them to be polite and maybe burp into a bag.
New Zealand is already proposing a so-called burp tax, and farmers are ready to revolt.
There'll be a hell of a lot of upheaval if they push ahead with this.
Last year, agriculture made up about 15% of Australia's greenhouse gas emissions. It was the fourth largest contributor, behind electricity, other energy sources and transport. The Federal Agriculture Minister's been quick to rule out any plans to follow New Zealand's lead with a methane tax. But the move to sign up to the aspirational global pledge might have given the opposition fresh fodder for a new scare campaign. Lucy Barber, ABC News, Canberra.
There you go. All your beps and farts need to be controlled. As the minister said, put a plug in the backside. How do we control that? So, and putting a tax on that, just by putting a tax on, even putting a tax on carbon, putting a tax on the methane emission, is it actually going to help? Of course, there is some funds and money there, but is it really helping? Where are we going? I think we're going insane. Well, right now, the other area that we're looking at currently is all the floods and these extreme rain conditions. Cars and buildings in the Maribyrnong River are inundated by floodwaters. Let's take a look at that report. As you can see, the fast-flowing water there getting into the car park areas and up and above and beyond. The river well and truly breaking its banks. While all this is happening, the residents are preparing to evacuate.
I'm here at the Maribyrnong River and I could have walked further out just a couple of hours ago. You can see here there is a sign, the Maribyrnong Road Jetty. Now, when we got here just before 6 o'clock this morning, there were steps down and everything. It's gone that quickly. You can see behind me here, Angler's Tavern. Now, that water level has risen so quickly and you can see the rapidly flowing current at the moment. This pub across the river has been inundated. The beer garden is completely swamped. We have been seeing bar stools and furniture floating down the river as it's being moved downstream. And just a little bit further along, where the camera is pointing at the moment, that is where they are moving some of these residents that are having to be evacuated by boat across out of some of those areas that have all of a sudden, suburban streets in inner northwestern Melbourne, it has to be said, are actually really rapidly going underwater now. I spoke just a short time ago with Matt Yotzi. Now, he is one of the residents that had to get evacuated, and he was just so distressed and shocked to see what had happened. And he also had to say as well that that obviously he can't get insurance because of this area. However, he's hoping that his house is okay because it's on stilts at the moment. I also spoke to somebody called Murray.
A town trying to beat a river's unforgiving rise.
I think it's a bit more wetter today too.
What makes you say that? Major flooding is expected in Rochester tomorrow morning.
I'm going to stay and fight it to the last man, pal. No, I'm not going anywhere.
Businesses are doing all they can to protect their stock, including some feats of ingenuity.
We've evacuated all our stock out, and now we're just lifting all our motors, anything that might get wet, we don't want to get wet, just lifting up to hopefully a satisfactory height.
But late this afternoon, the order was given to evacuate immediately.
With a flood the size that is predicted at the upper level, there is no area that will be safe in town.
There's also an emergency warning active in Seymour, which is facing its biggest flood emergency in decades.
I can say I've lived in this area for over 30 years, and it's probably the highest I've seen since I've been here.
A relief centre was opened this afternoon.
We can cater for up to 250 people to stay there overnight. We don't anticipate that will be needed, but the service is available there.
The flooding is widespread, with more than 12,000 homes across the state without power, from Swan Hill in the north to Colac in the state's south. The state's roads are a mess, forcing schools like Assumption.
So once again, when we look at that, the weather patterns and the weather conditions that are forever changing, and so much talk that's happening on climate change, and of course we have people who are protesting, there are activists who are working tirelessly and always trying to put government to account on what's happening with how to control climate change. But can we actually control climate change? Is there something beyond and above us as well? Does nature play a part in this? What do you say? Well, you've all had my views and have had that often, but here's that report.
We want freedom to protest.
They call themselves the Knitting Nanas, a group of climate activists now taking on the New South Wales government in the Supreme Court.
I feel as an older person it's my duty to stand up and protect our freedom to protest.
Two members of the group have launched a legal challenge against anti-protest laws introduced in April, arguing they're unconstitutional and impede on their freedom to protest.
Australians like us shouldn't have to risk imprisonment or bankruptcy to participate in our democracy.
The legislation was introduced in response to climate protests in March that blocked access to Sydney's Port Botany. People protesting illegally on roads, rail lines, tunnels or bridges can face fines of more than $20,000 and up to 2 years jail.
These laws are very vague and very broad, right? So the chilling effect that it can have on people not knowing, am I doing something that's going to be criminalised here?
The legislation was controversially backed by Labor. Unions will put forward a motion at the party's state conference this weekend, calling on the opposition to scrap the laws if elected.
It's important for the opposition to take a strong stance to say that it supports the democratic right of people in our state to peacefully protest.
Labor won't comment on the motions, but it's understood it's likely to be a divisive issue at its state conference, with the party's left faction also set to push for the laws to be repealed. Husni Shams, ABC News, Sydney.
Well, so there we go. The right to protest. Everyone should have a right to protest. It's a free country. But of course, the means and the what and why and how you do it is what people need to be mindful of. You need to look at the public security and the public safety first. You protest, get your message across, but not in those crazy circumstances and not by putting other people's life at risk, not disrupting the services of the general public as they go about their daily life. So you need to be mindful. Yes, you can protest against anything. That's your right, but you should do so in a organized manner, meaning in an approved manner. Not halting public transport and not putting other people at risk or danger. So, well, right now, moving on, some good news. Qantas is making a bit of a profit.
After posting a string of losses throughout the pandemic, Qantas announced yesterday that it expects to make a first half underlying profit before tax of more than $1 billion. It's also improved its performance with 75% of planes on time in October. It's also made an offer of extra pay to staff. So how are the staff viewing the airline's position? Well, Tony Lucas is a senior Qantas pilot and president of the Australian and International Pilots Association. He joins us now from Sydney. Morning, Tony. So what was your reaction to this announcement from Alan Joyce that likely to have over $1 billion in profit just in the first half of this year?
Look, it's fantastic to see a good recovery happening in the aviation industry. It's been a tough couple of years. And so to see things bounce back like they have is really satisfying. We're, as Qantas pilots, we're interested in the success of the group, and to see the group being successful is certainly a great thing.
There'll be a lot of people watching at home thinking, well, I don't care if they're posting a profit. My plane was late. They lost my luggage. I've had really poor service over the last couple of months. They want them to put that money into improving service.
Yeah, look, I think we're starting to see some decrease in the operational challenges that the Qantas Group has had, and in fact all airlines have had over the last 6 months. Certainly the COVID spikes have played a part in that. Aviation's a team sport and experience counts in those teams. And so certainly we've lost a fair bit of experience in the team over the last couple of years with either retirements, redundancies or outsourcing of various positions. And I think as that experience starts to rebuild, the operational complexity is decreasing, and that's why things are starting to improve and hopefully continue to improve.
Yeah, and look, as I said in the intro, it is 75% of flights in October which are now on time, which is good. It's certainly an improvement. You talked there about the outsourcing, the sacking. We've seen threats of industrial action from 3 groups of Qantas employees in the last couple of months, just from the flight attendants just this week. How is morale amongst staff?
Look, morale is...
question, but unfortunately we'll have to leave it there. So good to see the recovery that's happening. And if you've been to the airports lately, you would have seen the number of people traveling now is probably wow. It's just a wow factor, because right after the pandemic, people are now back on the track and they're all going everywhere. We made a short trip to Fiji. In one of the remote islands, and of course the number of people at the airports and all the airline queues completely full flights. So that's why there's profit levels are there, and as you mentioned, there are operational challenges and challenges that came with the experience, and unfortunately due to COVID, many long-term established staff had to be stood down. New people are coming on board and they need to be trained into the culture, as traveling is an experience. It is not just getting a ticket and being on the plane, the total experience in it. Well, ladies and gentlemen, right now it's time to go to our daily India report.
Welcome to the Daily India Report that brings you reports, interviews, features and more on India and the Indian diaspora. The US has underlined its commitment to work with India to support their shared vision of a free and open Indo-Pacific. The US administration's national security strategy has affirmed as policy that the US and India will work together to support their shared vision of a free and open Indo-Pacific. The US underlines its partnership with India as the world's largest democracy and a major defense partner. The strategy envisages that the US and India will work together bilaterally and multilaterally to support the shared vision of a free and open Indo-Pacific. The strategy has identified China as one of the major threats to American national security. The strategy has reaffirmed US ironclad commitments to its Indo-Pacific treaty allies Australia, Japan, South Korea, the Philippines and Thailand. It said the US will continue to modernize these alliances. The US, India and several other world powers have been talking about the need to ensure a free, open and thriving Indo-Pacific in the backdrop of China's rising military maneuvering in the region. China claims nearly all of the disputed South China Sea, though Taiwan, the Philippines, Brunei, Malaysia and Vietnam all claim parts of it. India has abstained from voting on a resolution condemning the Russian annexation of the 4 Ukrainian regions at the United Nations General Assembly. The United Nations General Assembly adopted a resolution condemning the Russian annexation of the 4 Ukrainian regions. 143 members voted in favor of the resolution while 5 voted against it. A total of 35 countries, including India, abstained. The resolution comes days after Russia vetoed a similar proposal in the Security Council, in which India had abstained. The latest resolution adopted by the members, where no one wields a veto, condemns Russia's attempted illegal annexations of the 4 Ukrainian regions following so-called referendums. This vote comes 2 days after Ukraine and Russia clashed on October 10th in the UNGA. After abstaining from the UNGA resolution condemning Russia, India expressed deep concern at the escalation of the conflict in Ukraine, including the targeting of civilian infrastructure and the death of civilians. Delivering her explanation of the vote before the member states, India's permanent representative to the UN, Ruchira Kambodge, said India has consistently advocated that no solution can be reached at human cost, and the escalation of hostilities is in no one's interest. Ambassador Kambodge said that India has urged that all efforts be made for an immediate cessation of hostilities and an urgent return to the path of dialogue and diplomacy. Ambassador Kambodge said that the global order that India subscribes to is based on international law, the UN Charter and respect for the territorial integrity and sovereignty of all states. These principles must be upheld without exception. US defense manufacturer Boeing will showcase FA-18 Super Hornet simulator in DEF Expo 2022. Highlighting its commitment to India's Atmanirbhar Bharat vision, US aerospace giant Boeing company is all set to showcase its wide range of advanced defense capabilities at India's DEF Expo 2022 during October 2022. The company has recently announced a potential economic impact of $3.6 billion over 10 years to the Indian economy with the FA-18 Super Hornet as India's carrier-based fighter, and also its continued investments in skilling, training, infrastructure, manufacturing, sustainment, engineering and technology transfer. The company said the economic impact would be over and above the American company's current offset obligations and other plans in the country. It will highlight its strategic investments in India's aerospace and defense ecosystem to build workforce development, partnerships, services, local infrastructure and capabilities while harnessing the strength of Indian talent and the large and growing network which has more than 300 supplier partners. The company will highlight the existing defense programs with the Indian Navy and the Indian Air Force like AH-64E Apache, CH-47F Chinook helicopters, C-17 transport aircraft and P-8I. And will also outline training and performance-based logistic solutions and sustainment for the Indian Armed Forces to support the life cycle of their fleets and also increase mission readiness. The Indian Navy is still in the process of finalizing the fighter jets for its aircraft carrier. The choice is between FA-18, Super Hornet Block 3 of Boeing and Rafale M. Advanced capabilities of the FA-18 Super Hornet Block 3 and F-15EX will also be showcased. Presently, India is operating P-8Is, 3 VVIP aircraft and 2 head-of-state aircraft as also C-17s, AH-64 Apaches, CH-47 Chinooks. Interpol has rejected India's Red Corner notice request against Khalistan separatist group founder Gurpatwant Singh Panoon. The International Criminal Police Organization, commonly known as the Interpol, has reportedly sent back India's request to issue a red notice against Khalistan separatist group 6 for Justice founder Gurpatwant Singh Panoon. The request was sent back by Interpol with a set of queries to the Indian government. The Indian government's Ministry of Foreign Affairs had earlier sent a protest note to the Canadian government, known as the Demarque, regarding the upcoming Sikh referendum in the Maple country. The note was also sent following alleged Khalistani rebels defacing a Hindu temple in Ontario, Canada. Interpol also raised concerns over the misuse of India's Unlawful Activities Act to target minority groups and rights activists without respecting their right to due process and a fair trial. However, despite acknowledging that Panoon is a high-profile Sikh separatist and the SFG is a group that calls for an independent Khalistan, it said that his activities have a clear political dimension and therefore it cannot be subject of a red notice according to Interpol's constitution. India maintains that the group's primary objective was to establish an independent and sovereign country in Punjab state and in that process challenges the sovereignty and territorial integrity of India. India share markets opened on 13th October in red amid weak global cues. Despite closing in the green in their last session, the Indian share market opened lower amid weak global cues and subdued foreign flows on October 13th. Benchmark indices NSE Nifty 50 declined over 30 points to trade below 17,100 levels and BSE Sensex fell over 150 points to trade at 57,470 levels. Broader markets, however, outperformed benchmark indices as Nifty Mid Cap 100 and Nifty Small Cap 100 edged up. All sectors started to trade on a volatile note. The Nifty Metal Index gained the most, over 1%. Meanwhile, Nifty Bank and Nifty IT indices declined up to 0.5%. Benchmark indices were trading lower in the pre-opening session. The Sensex was down 106.44 points or 0.18% at 57,519.47 and the Nifty was down 44.80 points or 0.26% at 17,078.80. The Indian rupee is expected to open flat and trade with negative bias amid elevated crude prices and risk aversion in equity markets. In the previous session, the rupee fell 14 paise to close at 82.35 against the US dollar amid the strengthening of the American currency and sustained foreign fund outflows. Besides, risk aversion sentiment among investors weighed on the local unit. RBI, seeking to arrest the rupee slide, is asking local banks to not build additional positions in the non-deliverable forward market, a move that could lead to offshore volatility spilling into local markets. The trailer of the first Marathi multilingual film Har Har Mahadev was released at an event in Mumbai. Har Har Mahadev, the first Marathi multilingual film, has been creating a new kind of rage among the audience with its teasers. Producers released the trailer of the film and it has started to spread its charm ever since its release. On October 11th, a grand trailer launch event was held in Mumbai in the presence of the cast and the team. The trailer unleashed a huge storm on the internet, achieving 5 million plus views across all social media in less than 24 hours. This demonstrated the pull from the audience for the film. Sharat Kelkar plays the character of Baji Prabhu Deshpande. The trailer encapsulates the power-packed performance by the cast and gives a glimpse of the inspirational story of a real battle led by Baji Prabhu Deshpande. According to our history, only 300 soldiers fought off the 12,000 enemy army and won, albeit paying for the victory with their lives. Produced by Z Studios, Sri Ganesh Marketing and Films and directed by Abhijit Deshpande, the film stars Subodh Bhave, Sharat Kelkar, Saili Sanjeev and Amruta Khanvilkar in the lead. The film is all set to hit the theatres on 25th October 2022. Ending the anticipation, the trailer of the much-awaited upcoming film Double XL was released on October 12th. The film stars Sonakshi Sinha and Huma Qureshi. Huma Qureshi and Sonakshi Sinha starrer Double XL has been anxiously awaited. The trailer of the film shows the two plus-size women dealing with body shaming in their daily lives and their friendship helps them overcome these mental barriers. The film deals with the subject of fat phobia and body shaming. The trailer begins with Huma Qureshi dreaming of meeting Shikhar Dhawan, interrupted by his mother, who speaks the same dialogues you might expect from a mother in every film. Is ladki ka kya? Shall I? Huma's dream of becoming a sports presenter was shattered when she was told that she was too healthy for it. Huma meets a depressed Sonakshi Sinha in the washroom and learns that she has just broken up with her boyfriend. The two become friends, move to London and fight with societal expectations about fat phobia and changing standards of normal. Choosing this subject for a film is an interesting concept and quite relevant, but the trailer promises that the film follows the typical Bollywood mainstream path that includes a club song, public meltdowns, and a determination to put through the subject in the audience's mind. Apart from Sonakshi and Huma, the film also stars Zahir Iqbal and Mahat Raghavendra. Famous Indian cricketer Shikhar Dhawan will also be seen in a very special style in Double XL. Directed by Satram Ramani, the film will release on October 14th.
दुनिया साली ओवर साइज फैब इंडिया की कुर्ते के पीछे भी चर्बी ढूंढ लेती है भाई साहब, और सांस कितनी भी अंदर क्यों ना खींच लो है, ससुरी जींस चढ़ती नहीं है ऊपर, टांगों पे फंस जाती है मनुष्य।
पर लौंडों की डिमांडें हो रखी होती है अलग। ब्रा तो बड़ा चाहिए, पर कमर इतनी सी, इतनी छोटी सी। तुमसे कुछ छोटा बड़ा मांग लिया तो कहाँ जाओगे तुम?
That's all for this bulletin of the Daily India Report.
So, ladies and gentlemen, that's about all we have for you in this segment today. But don't forget that tomorrow we are back with the weekend edition, and we'll be talking about lots of functions and events that are taking place here in Brisbane. But don't forget the big Abhijit show, which will be on tomorrow, and it is going to be a very good event. If you haven't got your tickets yet, please do so. As the tickets are going fast, there will be some tickets available, but you'll need to make a very, very quick decision, and tickets are at the moment available. So please, if you're thinking of making it there, do so. Get your tickets ASAP. There's many functions and events that are happening. So many Diwali functions already taking place as well, and of course we have Jimmy with us coming in to Brisbane as well. That will be again another beautiful show, and Brisbane Indian Times is proud to be supporting that as well. So all these functions are happening right here in Brisbane. So there you are, ladies and gentlemen, hoping you have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. We'll see you tomorrow with the weekend edition. And as I mentioned before, that it is just so wonderful to see you. And hopefully, this weekend with so many functions and events, the Benyo Diwali is taking place as well. And there's so many things that are happening this weekend. Brisbane is once again alive and high of activities. So good to see everyone out and about and doing their own thing. So until tomorrow, it's goodbye from us as usual. It's just been so wonderful having your company.